Getting check raised is never fun unless you have the nuts. Today we're going to talk about how to combat somebody who's check raising too wide for value on the flop. Hey everybody, Phil here. Adjustments in poker are extremely important. It's where I believe I generate the majority of my EV. And adjustments sometimes are kind of obvious. For example, you're up against an opponent who's bluffing the river way too much. What do? Well, for starters, you call the river a lot with your bluff catchers. You're up against somebody who's never bluffing the river. Well, you fold the river. And there are actually things that you should do before the river against that opponent to further take advantage of it. But the basic and biggest exploit in those cases, they're kind of obvious. Oftentimes the exploits are not obvious. And so today I want to talk about an example of an opponent who check raises the flop too wide for value. So oftentimes, if somebody's playing against somebody who's check raising a lot for value, they feel like they're getting check raised a lot because that opponent's check raise frequency is higher. Now, it could be that they're check raising too wide for value and with the normal amount of bluffs, in which case their check raise frequency is going to be high. It could be that they check raise too wide for value and appropriately increase their bluffing frequency. So then their overall check raise frequency is far too high compared to what you're normally going to face. Or of course, it could be that they check raise a normal frequency overall, but it's just all value because they've gone too thinly for value and they haven't included the bluffs. For now, I want to talk about the player who check raises too thinly for value, check raises kind of the normal amount of bluffs. So what's going to happen there is a few things. Against the flop check raise, they're going to be under bluffing by a little bit because they haven't added the requisite bluffs. Also, when you bet the flop, you're going to get check raised more often, as we talked about, because they've got the right amount of bluffs plus extra value hands. So their overall frequency goes up. A lot of people, when they encounter this kind of opponent, they hone in emotionally on getting check raised a lot. And they're like, okay, well, I need a plan for what I should do when I get check raised. So when I get check raised, okay, well, here on 10-7-3, let's say we're in a spot where our opponent's supposed to be check raising, ace 10 plus for value. But this opponent is check raising 10-9 for value. It can be very easy to get caught up in, okay, well, then I want to bet 3-bet flop with queens, and I want to, pile in money with all sorts of hands, or I want to bet 3-bet semi-bluff the flop more because they have these 10-9 hands that are in a tough spot. And the reality is you're playing against an opponent who's under bluffing with their flop check raise. Yes, they have a few more of those thin value hands, but they still have all the strong value hands. And so playing that differently against the actual check raise does not generate that much EV for you. And actually, if anything, what you need to do is just fold more because they're under bluffing. And certainly once it goes check raise and you call and then you get to the river in one way or another and they're betting through, fold more by the time you get there because their initial check raise range was too value heavy. There are some other things you want to do, though, that are less obvious. So one, which is going to be small amount of EV generation, is that you want to see bet a little bit less frequently on the flop because you're going to face raises. So what are the hands that we stop betting? Well, the hands that really don't want to be check raised. So with our pure air bluffs, we don't really care about getting check raised too often. We can still bet those. With our strong value hands, we certainly want to bet those, and actually we want to bet those more often. So against this opponent, if you are slow playing some very strong hands at some frequency, you want to stop doing that. You want to just bet those on the flop. And then there are those kind of cuspy hands where it's like second pair or weak gut shot or like two over card plus backdoor flush draw. Those are the hands you want to not bet as often because you're going to get check raised off of equity a little bit more frequently. The biggest adjustment to make is not on the flop. A lot of people, like I said, focus on, okay, well, this is what I'm adjusting to. He's check raising too frequently. So what do I do against the check raise? That's not where you generate the most EV. The most EV comes from what you do on the turn. So now if our opponent check calls the flop, what have we learned about his range? Well, we knew that his check raise range includes too many value hands. He's gone too thinly for value. Where did those thin value hands come from? They came from what was supposed to be his check call range. So now his check call range is weakened. He doesn't have as many 10-9s, queen 10s, jack 10s. So now we get, and oftentimes this type of player is also fast playing too frequently with sets. I mean, you're supposed to check raise a lot of sets, but just like always fast playing. So the way to take advantage of this opponent and generate the most EV is actually on the turn with turn continuation bets. Their check call range is weakened, and you can attack that by both widening your turn value betting range and increasing your turn bluff frequency. Now, if you have a read that they end up overcalling turn, or like call with some hands that are too weak, so they're calling the right frequency roughly, then you probably want to increase both kind of proportionally. But if you are up against somebody who, folds the correct hands on the turn, which means they're overfolding because they don't have as many of those good hands in their range, then you want to mostly add bluffs. Now, if you're not sure how they play on the turn and river, the safest thing to do is just increase both. So like widen your value range. So maybe perhaps before then on a brick turn, you might have had like some one street bets with whatever, queen 10 to check back turn and then value bet river. Bet those on the turn. So widen your value range on the turn and then increase your bluffs so that you're still bluffing at kind of an appropriate ratio compared to your value bets. It's so easy to, I guess I'm repeating myself at this point, it's so easy to get so focused on combating the check raise, but all the EV against this opponent comes from finding the turn C bets. If you have any types of opponents in mind who give you a lot of trouble, please let me know in the comments below, and I will tell you how I'd adjust to them.